I remember the day we heard our son's heartbeat for the first time. I was lying on the bed in the midwife's office. I had my t-shirt rolled up around my waist, and my husband was way on the other side of the room, not quite sure what to do, as a midwife prodded my stomach with the Doppler device, trying to find the pulse. When she found the pulse, the sound of it was so loud, it just filled the whole room, and it kind of sounded like a horse galloping. It was just going ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. So excited, I turned to look at my husband, and I gave him the widest smile, but he wasn't even looking at me. He was kind of like looking through me, for once in his life, completely speechless. And then after a moment, he kind of just said, wow. Up until that point, the idea of us becoming parents had seemed quite abstract, but hearing that strong, solid heartbeat for the first time, everything felt very, very real. Soon we were debating issues about my son's life. We were thinking about what schools he would go to. We were debating who would be the stricter parent. And quite early on, we decided to call him Amari because it means God has promised. The first couple years of our marriage had been quite turbulent, so we really felt like this baby was a symbol of all that was good. It was a symbol of hope. It was a symbol of optimism. But when I was 8 months pregnant, I found myself in court, standing next to my husband as his co-defendant in a criminal trial. The day when the verdicts came back, we were both so nervous, and I could really sense that the pressure had taken its toll on my husband, but we were standing there, waiting for the jury to return their verdict. First of all was my husband's verdict, and when they said guilty, I just started beating my chest. I was saying, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And he just turned to me and he said, Jen, I'm sorry. These things happen. I didn't really have time to process that because it was time for my verdict to come back. And there was a bit of a pause because it wasn't a unanimous verdict. But nevertheless, it came back guilty again. And I heard a scream as someone ran out of the courtroom and the door slammed behind them. I fell to the floor, and then the judge was shouting for the court clerk to open up the dock, and he's fumbling with the keys, trying to get it in the lock. Someone's asking for a doctor, a medic, anything. I'm just rolling backwards and forwards on the floor saying, oh God, oh God, oh God. My husband's on top of me, picking me up, saying, Jen, you need to stand up. You need to stand up. Eventually, I stood up, and I kind of stumbled out of the dock, and I sat at the back, the table at the back where usually the solicitors sit. My barrister turned, and he held my hand. Someone gave me a glass of water, and I was staring just in complete shock at the judge. The judge gave me a suspended sentence, and he said, don't worry, you're not going to give birth in prison. And if you stay out of trouble, which I have no doubt you will, you won't see the inside of a prison cell. As soon as he finished that, I ran out of the courtroom. I found my sister-in-law, who was the one that screamed and ran out. And my brother followed me, and we were outside, and I was just grabbing the both of them, and I was just crying over and over and over again. The next day, I was back at home. I was still wearing the same clothes that I'd worn the day before, like I'd slept in them. And I was talking to my friend who had come over to see me after she heard what happened. And I was still trying to be positive. I was thinking, this baby is coming. I have to work out what I need to do next. What do I need to do to prepare for this baby? And it got to about 2:00 in the afternoon, and my phone that was sat next to me just started going crazy. It was vibrating. It was lighting up. There was messages, phone calls, all kinds of things. So I picked it up. I opened a message, and all I saw was a screenshot of the website of a very prominent newspaper, and it was just mine and my husband's mugshots next to each other. I didn't even read what was in the message. I didn't even read what the article said, but I was just scrolling through the message after message, more screenshots that people were sending, just our mugshots over and over. People were sending me conversations that others were having about us, talking about everything that happened. And all of that kind of optimism that this baby had signified, every kind of good feeling that might have been left in my body disappeared. I was completely eaten alive by the shame. I couldn't even leave my house Because if I went out and someone looked at me more than once, to be honest, I was thinking, no, they recognize me. They recognize me from a newspaper article. I can't be here. So I was just at home, whiling away the days, waiting until it was time to give birth. And a few weeks later, it was time, and my birth wasn't the natural kind of peaceful experience that I was hoping for. My son was actually delivered by forceps in the operating room, doctors rushing around, the machines beeping, and just the smell of blood just hanging in the air. And I know that the first couple weeks of motherhood are hard for everyone, but they felt especially dark for me. I remember one night I woke up and I was probably delirious. And I just heard this baby crying. So I turn and there's a Moses basket next to my bed. I pick up Amari out of the Moses basket and I'm holding him and I'm saying, whose baby is this? Why is he crying? After a moment, it kind of dawned on me that this was actually my son. And no one was coming to take care of him because he was my responsibility. So I put him on the bed, and he's still crying. And now I'm crying, and my tears are just falling onto his face. And I was just saying, I can't do this. The next morning when I woke up, I just felt so completely mortified. The fact, what mother forgets that she has a baby? But I thought I need to make sense of this experience for myself. I need to understand what was happening. So I wrote a blog post, and it was called The Hardest Thing That I've Ever Done. And I wrote it more as a form of catharsis, really. And I put it on my blog, and I wasn't really expecting anyone to read it because no one really reads blogs. But within a day, over 400 people have read it, and they were sharing it and passing it around. And I was getting messages from complete strangers saying, thank you so much for writing this. This happened to me. I understand completely what you're going through. Thank you so much. And I was encouraged. I was encouraged because I wasn't the only mother experiencing what I now knew was postnatal depression. But I was also encouraged because I realized that sharing my story had value, and talking about my experiences really meant something to other people who I'd never even met. So, kind of inspired by this situation, I then went and I started to work for a company that I'd done a bit of work for before. I started writing for them. And it was going pretty well. Every time I wrote, I felt like I was coming back to myself in a way. I was finding who I was again. But still, the shame and the paranoia was still there. It was there at the back of my mind, and it was constantly whispering to me. I was so distracted by it that I was convinced that someone was going to go to the people who'd employed me, show them a newspaper article and say, do you know who's working for you? This is who you've got working for you. Isn't she a conniving little criminal? Do you really want her? So being a Christian and the fact that the people who I was working for were Christians, I thought, they talk about how we're family. So maybe I should just come clean and tell them what was happening. So I wrote this email, and it took me probably about a day to write it. And I knew it by heart at the end of it because I was going over and over this small paragraph. I explained everything that happened. And I let them know that despite what you may read, that wasn't me. I didn't do what they said I did. I pressed send, and I waited. A few days later, I got a response, and it just said, while we're sympathetic to your situation, we feel like we can't work with you anymore. We believe it's best that we do not work with you any longer. And I was absolutely devastated. I was completely crushed. On a purely economic level, I was relying on this job to make my ends meet. But then I felt like there was a pattern that was repeating. Every time I tried to do the noble thing, the good thing, it just backfired in my face. So I stood by my husband when people told me that it was in my best interest to leave him. And that didn't work out. And now I'd come clean and been upfront and honest and kind of transparent with the people that I was working with. That didn't end well either. So I thought, maybe I'm not a noble person. Maybe everything that was said about me, everything that people have said about, or people have believed when they've read these stories, maybe that's true. Maybe that is who I am. So I just gave up. I gave up. I was at home, sitting on my sofa, watching daytime TV. Well, not really watching. I was kind of more in a daze. And then one day, I realized that I've seen this episode of Murder, She Wrote before, earlier on in that day, in fact. And I just thought, this isn't me. This isn't who I am. And I definitely can't be this person for my son. I'm his only parent. I'm the only person that he's got at this moment in time. I need to do something better. So I started writing again for my blog. And I was just trying to reclaim bits of my narrative. I was trying to work out who I was again, apart from the tabloid headlines and the newspaper stories and what people were gossiping about behind my back. I was trying to work out, who am I? What am I about? So I was writing, and then eventually I got asked to write for a very large parenting website. And at first I was like, I cannot do this. No way. They're going to see my tiny little headshot, and someone's going to remember that they saw a mugshot somewhere, and that's it, it's all going to be over. But I thought, you know what, just do it. So I did it. And then, off the back of that, I got invited to appear on a radio program for a very big media broadcasting company. And again, I was like, no way, no way, no way. Like, this is when your cover will get blown. But then I was like, oh, it's radio, no one's going to see my face. Maybe it'll be all right. So I went and I did that too. And all of these little kind of victories, once again, I was feeling myself coming out of this kind of darkness and remembering who I was. And then came an opportunity that I'd been waiting for ages. Someone asked me to do a workshop with Black and mixed race kids in a school. And I was like, yes, this is me, 110%. I can do this. I was made for this. But once again, those stories of shame and paranoia, they went into overdrive this time. They were like, you can't do this. Work with kids? Like, you're a bad, terrible, terrible person. You cannot work with these kids. But that moment was a do or die moment, because I knew that if I didn't say yes to this opportunity that I'd really wanted to do for a long time, I would be saying no for the rest of my life. So I said, yeah, I'll do it. And when the day of the workshop came, I was so nervous. Like, I couldn't even stand up straight, because I felt like if I tried to stand up, like, my knees would start knocking together like a cartoon character or whatever. So I was kind of like leaning nonchalantly on the desk, you know, hey kids, how you doing? And at first, they didn't know what to make of me, because I was there to do a storytelling workshop, and they were thinking stories, Harry Potter, like fairy tales, like what's that got to do with us? But we started talking, and we started talking about stories in the form of stereotypes, and the kind of way that we feel when other people have a bad perception of us, and how that makes us feel. One boy said, you know, maybe all these stereotypes about young Black teenagers, maybe they're right. Maybe we bring it on ourselves. Maybe it's our fault that people think this way about us. Another girl said, you know, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, they did their thing back in the day, but racism is here to stay. There's nothing that we can do to change this. This is how we are. This is who they think we are, and it's just going to be like that forever. So I started to talk to them about the work that I did, the projects that I've done with ex-gang members and young mums. And then I set them a challenge. I said, think about one story that is told about you, about people like you, about people you know. What's that one story that you know is wrong, but it keeps getting told over and over and over again? Now, what can you do to change that narrative, to challenge it and reclaim it and tell the truth? So they started working on their stories, and it was really great. Like, they started talking about the way that they felt that they were perceived, and then they started talking about how, you know, we're not just loud, we're not violent, we're these kind of strong people, we're strong characters, and they were really getting into it. So much so that at the end of it, these kids who at first didn't know what to make of me, they weren't really engaging, but then they were saying, Miss, we need to do an assembly. We need to tell these stories in front of the whole school. Can we do it? Can we do it? And I was so happy for them. I was happy because at the age of 13 or 14, they learned something that it took me a bit while longer to learn. And that's that stories are how we make sense of the world around us. They are how we define our experiences and understand our lives. And they are so powerful because of that function. And that's why when a bad story is told about you, whether it's splashed across the media, or even if it's just a gossip that might be told in your social circles, or things that are said about you amongst family members, that's why those stories feel so damaging. And when we internalize those damaging, negative, horrible narratives, when we internalize them and continually tell them to ourselves over and over and over again, that's why they're so limiting. But the thing is, we can reclaim our stories. We can take back ownership of those narratives that define us. And we can tell them the way that they were always meant to be told. And however you want to tell your story, whether it's through photography, whether it's through writing, whether it's through singing, acting, I don't know, there's a million different ways that you can define your existence for yourself. But despite all of those stories you may tell, the most important story that you will tell is the one that you tell yourself. So don't let anybody ever define that story for you. Thank you.